Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Enough, I get the point.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. I had a comment recently, and I wish I had written the commenter's name down. If you were the one that said that in essence, you believe Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man essentially killed the comic industry really before it even began, or at least the American comic industry, definitely let me know in the comment section. I'll pin it. That way everyone can know who actually can take credit for this. I thought it would be an interesting discussion, so I decided to have my good friend, the X-Men historian, the Marvel aficionado, Doc, on the channel to talk about. How you doing, Doc?
I'm spectacular, sir. Thank you for inviting me, and I like this topic.
I thought it's an interesting premise, and the idea is that because Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, obviously X-Men and other characters became so popular that U.S. comic publishers, namely DC and Marvel, are completely unwilling or don't have the patience or, I don't know, the ability to create new characters and stick with them. Because why would I stick with a new character when I could just, make 5 more Batman titles and know that they're going to sell? So right now, we're sitting in a world where we've got Batman doing 12 different, on 12 different adventures at the same time. We got Spider-Man probably on 4 different adventures at the same time. Superman's, it seems like he's actually been separated. He's on Warworld, but he's still in Justice League, to where, U.S. publishers have kind of put themselves in their own box, and they have nowhere to go because they have put all their chips on a certain few characters that they can't do anything new anymore.
On the surface, I initially reject that because without Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man, you wouldn't have a massive, you need them to be those kind of cultural icons in order to make the comic industry a big mammoth industry that would, guess you could say, that could penetrate the cultural zeitgeist. But at the same time, when you think about it, he's actually not wrong. I mean, I think this goes back to that too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And almost like that, the situation we've heard, over the last 12 or 13 years, a phrase that has entered the cultural lexicon of too big to fail. The way that Ford, GM, IBM, Microsoft, these companies have become too big to fail because they're so entrenched in our culture. Now that is being done on a more, I guess, practical and infrastructural level, but on an entertainment level, there's nothing in the American entertainment sphere that can even touch Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. Nothing has had 80 years. I mean, what character other than maybe Sherlock Holmes? Even James Bond isn't that old, but I mean, at least from the American side, what property, what character, what anything has lasted and stood the test of time the way that these 3 have?
Yeah, but you think of a character like Conan, created by Robert E. Howard. There are other people that are still writing in canon Conan stories and whatnot. And you had a lot of stories coming out, but it doesn't feel like the character was kind of run to the ground quite like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. You mentioned like a James Bond. Sure, there are books and stuff coming out, but it's not like they're making 4 Bond movies in a year and you got 2 cartoons and 7 comic books all coming out at the same time. They become their own brand, but in this case, it's almost been to the detriment to the companies themselves and to the creators. Because if you're on a cool character that's not Batman, you want to go and write Batman because you can make some more sales. You're gonna obviously do better in the future with trades and whatnot. And everybody in the entire industry is incentivized to write nothing but those characters.
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up Conan, and Conan has stood the test of time, but he's never reached the kind of cultural heights that Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man have. He's never been that steady seller. He's never been able to carry numerous titles. He's never been able to exist simultaneously for a long period of time, accepted in multiple mediums. You'll have a short run. You had in the 80s, you had the Schwarzenegger doing it, but then it faded from, it wasn't strong, and it wasn't a strong enough property to continue to generate film.
Well, at that point in time, they weren't just making sequel.
No, they weren't.
Did get I think it was actually, it's a sequel. But that second Conan movie just sucked balls. That was the problem.
Well, yeah. But for the most part, they've even tried bringing it back a couple of times. They did the Jason Momoa one a few years ago, and that is in this sequel era, and it never had the kind of success. Sure, Bond has, but even Bond has waned over throughout the years, where some of the late Roger Moore stuff was kind of almost borderline direct to DVD, or direct to video would have been back in that.
All right, Doc, we're not doing a video about other franchise. We want to keep it to Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, and they're really holding these publishers back.
Well, they are,
because why would you invest in a new character when you could just take the same writer, the same artist, and have them do a 12th Batman book, and your sales would be better?
Yes, they become almost a slave to their own success, where they don't have, there's an expectation, it's created this expectation in the corporate mind, in the corporate world, especially now that they're owned by parent companies, that these characters, that all the books that they create should be on that level of Spider-Man, on that level of Superman, on that level of Batman. And so whenever they do come out with something new that isn't as instantly successful, or even doesn't have even the legs to become that successful, the corporate kind of looks at them like, you could do that, or you could just make another Batman, because that always sells.
When you look at the markets, they're so different. When Batman and Superman were introduced, 80 years ago, it probably cost a nickel to buy a comic book. A kid, he would have to, is he going to buy a soda pop, or is he going to buy a comic book? Spider-Man, obviously introduced 60 years ago in Amazing Fantasy, compelling character on the cover, sales boomed. Obviously there was immediate interest because it looked good, but it was that it was an impulse buy. And that's what, got the people's, you're never going to have a phenomenon like that in today's market, because the comic books are so expensive that if you want to make the next Batman, the next Superman, the next Spider-Man, you've got to take the Todd McFarlane Spawn route. Sure, there was an immediate interest in the character, but it waned, and then it got popular again. You got to be willing to put in a decade or two to actually make these characters hit.
You really do. You need to be able to put in the work. You need to put in the time. I don't know whether, and you made a great point, you're not going to have this cultural phenomenon occur out of a character in a comic. It's going to occur because of the price of the comic. So it's going to occur in other medium. Deadpool got super popular, but really only because he got a movie.
He was popular before that, but he was also in the Spider-Man cartoon and stuff.
Yeah. So but he really got popular in the culture, not just within comic book, because of his appearances in other media. Not really. And same with
Ryan Reynolds did a really good job of did like a viral campaign where he was showing up as Deadpool everywhere and all kinds of crazy photo ops.
But Harley Quinn had the same kind of. She got really popular from being outside of comics. Now, that doesn't make them unpopular in the comics. It just means penetrating the culture is something that needs to happen outside of. So you're not going to have that occur in the comic book just because of the overall cost. Because what you really need, is something that transcends comic books. I don't think, the comic book industry has put themselves in a position where, Superman and Batman were able to get ultra popular just because they were dirt cheap.
And they look cool on the cover.
Yeah.
That's what, they had the advertisement on. The kids went in there, they bought it in mass.
Exactly.
Detective Comics stayed Batman, but you also got the Batman book. Action Comics, became Superman, but you also got the Superman book. They were able to carry 2 titles.
Yeah.
Which seems like plenty for one character, especially if you got a Justice League with the both of them in there as well.
And I mean, in the 80s, you got up to 4 titles for each, 5, I think, for Batman whenever they launched Legends of the Dark Knight or Shadow of the Bat, one of the 2. And Spider-Man carried 4 titles. I mean, that's why if you look at them, those are the ones I know that I always use this kind of metric, but those are the only 3 characters that I believe are actual A-list in all of comics, because they're the only. Well, no, I'm sorry, Richie Rich too, and Archie, because they could carry multiple titles too. But otherwise, I know that the corporate kind of heads, they don't quite understand it. They don't. They don't understand what makes things popular versus what doesn't make things popular. It's kind of like the way that producers are in Hollywood. Well, we made it, so it should be popular because it's just as good as the other thing we made.
But here's the thing, Doc. As a fan, you and I are both comic readers and fans. Absolutely. We are disincentivized from buying in on a new character. Why not just stick with X-Men? Why not just stick with Batman, Superman? They're never going away. If you go out there and you're like, you know what? I think this Silencer book looks pretty damn good. Or I like this new, what is it? You had Sideways, was kind of like a Spider-Man kind of book within the DC universe when they did that New Age of Heroes. And it felt like, oh, wow, they're making these new characters. They're obviously important because they're putting all their best artists on there. You had, Jim Lee, Tony Daniel, in vast array of fantastic artists. But it was almost immediate. You realize that that's not what was really happening. Jim Lee didn't even finish an issue. Tony Daniel was off of Damaged by the 3rd issue. John Romita Jr. was off of Silencer by issue 4, I believe, which ended up being a great thing because Victor Bogdanovich ended up replacing it. But why would I want to go in there and heavily invest in these new characters when you know that DC Comics, their leadership, same thing with Marvel, they don't have the testicular fortitude to try and stick it out with a new character and see if they can actually make the next big, superhero, character within their universes. It's way more, you're way more likely to find something that's got longevity that could really be something in the future outside of the big 2 at any comics, because no one's going to give up on their own creation at the expense of Batman.
Yes. I mean, you are correct. Marvel did this a lot they did it in the early 90s. You had that run of, there was a big phase with them with launching like Sleepwalker and Darkhawk and Solo and a bunch of these other characters that never caught on, but they gave them the college try. I think part of it with Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man is that they were launched kind of not as part of a huge initiative, I guess. And, the New Age of Heroes was an initiative. They tried throwing 30 things at the wall to see what stuck. And as a result, none of them did. So there is a disincentive for readers to stick around, because we know when they do these initiatives, that's when it's going to go to hell. There's no
24-month shelf life or less.
Yes. I mean, you're looking at 12 to 24 month shelf life, the same thing. Now that's down from when Marvel did it in the 90s, where they gave it a 4-year shelf life, because they gave all of them about 30 to 50 issues. But back in the day, they just focus on one good character. They refine it down, they tweak it a little bit before they launched it. It have some really cool hook to it, and they just stick one character out there, and then they'd let it run for a while. And that would be really the only new major character in that little corner of the universe. They weren't throwing 20 things at the wall inside of 6 months to see what would stick.
And you're not only the 20 things at the wall. If you want to introduce a new character in the DC Comics universe, you're not competing with Batman. You're competing with 12 Batmans.
Yes.
Because he's got 12 freaking books. You're not competing with Superman. You're competing with 3 Superman because he's in 3 different books. There's always so much money to go around to invest in these titles and see and give them a try.
Yeah. And the thing is, because they're doing it as an initiative, they don't have the longevity. They do have that short shelf life. Any interest from new readers or non-readers or existing readers in adopting that gets split up over all of those new characters, because you launch 6 books but you're aiming at like 30,000 readers. Well, now only 5,000, like each of them just pick one. So maybe you get lucky and all of them pick the same one, but more than likely all of them are going to pick different ones. So you end up with 5,000 readers on each book, which isn't enough to support it. Because they're not going to try all 6. They're going to try 1 or 2, maybe 3. And then corporate looks at it, goes, well, you didn't have as much success as Batman, so got to cancel it.
Well, there's also the thing with when you look at the creators behind it. Why is a creator going to invest in this new character? They're not getting, the kind of equity. IP recognition that they normally would get. You see what happened to the creative, Bill Finger with Batman. We see what happened to Siegel and Schuster with Superman. We saw what happened with Steve Ditko, and even Stan Lee to a degree, who specifically said he wishes that he had got the copyright to his characters with Spider-Man.
Yep.
So you're doing for higher work, and you want to do the best job you can, but do you really want to put your heart and soul into something that, even if it ends up being popping big, it's just DC's character, and they can go and they can tweak it, they can change it, they can bastardize the whole thing, and you'll never get the credit and the money that you really deserve anyway.
I mean, how much of your heart are you going to have in it when you know that all the best ideas that you could possibly have, you're going to keep to do for your creative stuff, your creator owned stuff? At best, you're giving them your D level, your D tier new creations, the kind of stuff, kind of like the Eternals with Stan or with Jack Kirby. He basically just picked up the stuff he left on the cutting room floor of the New Gods at DC, brought it over and gave it to Marvel because they asked him to do a new cosmic thing. He had realized by that point that they weren't going to really respect him, so why should he give them his best work? Why not just give him his leftovers?
And the other thing is the creators aren't stupid, just like the readers aren't stupid. They know that DC's not going to fully invest in a new character. The shelf life on the thing is probably 24 months at best. Why emotionally invest in something that is just going to be put on the back burner, put in a corner, and brought out once every 5 or 6 years, or possibly if there's an entire wide event, he might be up in the corner with a little cameo.
Yeah.
Why even try and make something great? Because it's never going to be Batman, so it'll never be good enough.
It'll get abandoned like everything else. I mean, look, we understand that there are tent poles within the comics industry. They're necessary to some degree, but the problem is I think DC and Marvel, to their extent, have taken Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man and made them such tall tent poles that nothing else, it's like having a big top. Well, no. I mean, think about it like
sucking all the energy out of everything else around them.
It's a tent, and the center and all those major tent poles, those 3 tent are the size of the Empire State Building, and everything else is you trying to, lift up an edge with a matchstick, because that's the way it is in comparison. I mean, at least in the cultural impact, in the sales impact, and in the way that corporate looks at it of, well, it's not lifting up to the same extent. It hasn't grown big enough to even, they are victims of their own success.
Yeah. So in that respect, with the commenter's suggestion, I would say Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man created the comic industry. We would not have it without them. No. But in the same retrospect, because DC and Marvel become so reliant on those characters, and there's so many versions of them all going at the exact same time, and there are so many damn comic books, and they are so expensive, and they never fully invest on anything else. Yeah, they overshadow everything. There's only a few characters that you know that you could fully invest in and know that you're going to get a good treatment of the character, and it's going to be kind of evergreen. It's always going to be there. And in that respects, I kind of agree with them.
I kind of do too. I feel like
at the same time, it's great.
Yeah, right? I feel like if Marvel and DC were to ever just back off of the overexposure of these characters and have some restraint, they could let some of the other characters catch up to the point where, they're holding up a little bit of the tent too. And then once they're holding up a little bit of the tent, you want to keep them growing so they can hold up a little more of the tent, take a little bit of the pressure off Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. And maybe, just maybe, you can build something that it's not going to reach that same level, might at least be competitive. So I feel like they could.
I think the time for that is past, Doc. I think that was the 90s, maybe the early double aughts. But at this point, every decision that you're seeing coming out of these companies is the most short-sighted decision you could ever think of. Everything is quick money. It's what's happening next week. It's never about what's happening, 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. You would take long-term strategic thinking about their universes and their characters for them to realize that perhaps every book being Batman, having so many Spider-Man characters, having so many X-Men books is preventing them from ever, getting new characters over, getting new teams over to an ability to where they could, stand on their own.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I think it's too late to put the toothpaste back in the tube here.
Yeah, they put themselves in a corner.
Yep. And unless they hit a home run with some fourth character somewhere, or can grow a Wonder Woman or a Wolverine, not even a Wolverine, but like some
Nightwing could be an A-list character if they put in the time. There's enough recognition of the character. He has enough history. And, Dick Grayson's a phenomenal character, eminently relatable, just like Peter Parker's Spider-Man.
You can grow those B-list characters, the ones that are good and solid and can support themselves. You could grow them into A-list, but it takes the work, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I just don't think with the economics and the situation in comics right now that's never going to happen. So I say he's more right than wrong.
I have to say I agree, and I hate the fact that I agree.